This is session 11 of the Sales Mastermind podcast. Today in the hot seat, we have Michelle. Hit the music. Hello and welcome to the Sales Mastermind podcast. Get ready to harness the power of the Mastermind community and take your sales to the next level. I'm your host, Jonathan Stewart. Before we get into today's question, I just want to take a moment and let you guys know that this podcast exists to answer your sales, marketing, entrepreneurial, or small business questions. So if you'd like your question featured on a future episode, you can simply email me at Jonathan, Jonathan, at salespurpose.com. Or if you go over to salespurpose.com/SM podcast, you'll see a couple options there to also submit your question. Today's question came by email from Michelle. She asked, "My new sales job involves going to local businesses to pitch them our company's line of products. What are your tips for making a genuine connection with the people I'll meet and generating interest in our brand?" When I saw this question, I was very happy to answer it because this really is right in line with what I've done the last 3 years of my sales career. 3 years ago, I started a new sales territory in the Southern California area, and our company was unknown and new to the area, so nobody knew really who we were. We had a few couple accounts here and there, generating just a very small amount of money. So essentially, I was coming in unknown and making these connections with local businesses around as a business-to-business salesman. And so this is exactly what I've had to figure out how to do over the last several years. So I'll hopefully be able to really provide some value to Michelle, but also to those of you listening. So what I want to do today is give you 11 tips that you can use to help build a good connection with the people you're talking to, but also at the same time, it was important there to generate interest in your brand. And of course, the goal is to sell your product and in the process build that relationship, but the end goal is to sell the product and help that person. So the first tip I have for you is, and this is a tip that I often use in situations to answer a question like this, but it's because it's important. The first tip for you guys is to make sure that you are pleasant and you smile when you meet these people. And so you're trying to build a relationship, you're trying to make a connection. You got to make sure you're a pleasant person to be around and that you actually look happy to be there. And when you're happy, when you're pleasant, it actually changes the whole way people react to you, and it'll make people want to be around you more often. So be pleasant and make sure that you smile when you're around the people you're trying to build that connection with and sell that product to. The second tip is to make sure, if possible, to avoid a cold visit. You know, a cold visit is a lot different than a cold email or a cold phone call. A cold visit can actually be disrespectful in some ways, and really it can be taken as kind of rude. Be respectful of people's schedules. People are very busy, and try to avoid just showing up to a business and expecting people to drop everything they're doing to speak with you. That owner of a business usually has more on their to-do list than can get done each day. And if you come in and distract them, they're not going to appreciate you very much. You'll get pushed off to the side, and they won't probably buy your product at all. But if you go to them, you maybe approach them via a social network, LinkedIn, you go in and you send an email, you go in and talk to the people that are the gatekeepers, and you effectively get contacts there and work your way in. And then you can actually schedule at least a phone call with them to talk about how you can help them, and then sell them there to get you a meeting. So your first goal is to just get maybe that phone call and then to get that visit. Don't just show up in people's place of business. Now, there are some times to break this rule. I will tell you this. In the work that I'm in, sometimes it's a very small company where maybe the owner is like the one employee, or maybe there's two employees. And in that case, it may be hard to contact him in any other way, and so that might be okay just to maybe call ahead and say, "I'm showing up, this is what I do." That's for a really small company. Or if everything else fails, you cannot get a hold of who you need to, you might attempt a cold visit. But as much as possible, people will respect it, and they will be very much more apt to buy your product if you respect their time and don't just show up unannounced. The third tip I give you is to make sure that you do a little bit of research on the business that you're going to approach, and also, if you can, find out on the decision maker, on maybe the buyers, on the owners. With all the social networks that we have out there today and the web and company websites, we have no excuse to go into a sales call blind. There's no excuse for it. If anybody is somewhat technically savvy, they're already going to be on LinkedIn, Facebook, and maybe even Twitter. Those are the three big ones that you'll want to make sure you check out and find out what you can about them. Obviously, you don't want to be a stalker, but you want to know a little bit about them, maybe some of the deals they've recently done, or some of the articles that they've written about, or some of the transitions in the company have made, or maybe some ways that they've been doing business in the past. You want to find out as much as you can about the business, so when you go in, you'll know that basic information. This helps you because when you go into the meeting or you try to make that initial call, you'll be able to ask the right questions and you'll be able to show them that you've done your homework. This will set you apart from the crowd and make you a person they're more likely to want to talk to. And this will help build that first genuine connection with people, showing that you actually cared enough to look up the company. So very, very key. As a note, I will say that businesses are constantly being contacted by marketers, by phone, by email, and in person, and they will naturally just tune you out if you don't stand out as somebody that can help. I can tell you how many times I've walked into a place of business where I've already had an account, so they know who I am, and so I'm no longer a salesperson necessarily. I'm actually a business partner, and I see the frustration by people that just call them all day long trying to sell them products, and I can tell how short they are with them, and it doesn't get anywhere. And I can tell, when somebody just shows up and they're trying to sell a product to them right there without building any kind of relationship, I see how it doesn't work. And these people show frustration. They even vent that frustration to me, talking about how they're constantly being pummeled with all these marketing offers, and it constantly gets to a point where it's hard to do business. And so keep this in mind when you're approaching people. One of the ways you can stand out is by, like we said, doing your research, showing that you actually cared enough to know what really matters to them. So do your research before you go into that meeting or try to make that initial call. The fourth tip for making this connection and building interest in your brand is to make sure that you ask relevant questions and then you listen to the answers to those questions. And so I said relevant questions because it doesn't take anything to just go in and pepper them with a bunch of questions. But if you've done your research, then you can ask questions that actually matter to them. And then also you want to make sure that the questions that you ask, the relevant questions, they actually lead to a goal that you're trying to get to. So if your goal is to try to get them to do a test of your product, then you'll ask questions appropriately that lead them to that particular goal. You can ask these questions and then make sure that you also ask follow-up questions to dig deeper and to get to the root of the answers. This is important too. Don't try to sell before you have listened. Sell responsibly, I like to say. Don't sell before you've listened. Ask questions, listen, and then you know what? When you go to sell, you'll already know what it's going to take to sell them because you've asked the questions. You've listened. They respect you. They can tell that you actually care. So make sure you ask good, relevant questions, and more importantly, make sure that you actually listen. The fifth tip I have is to determine how your product makes their life better, your product or service. So you need to be able to quickly, within a couple minutes of the conversation, be able to describe to them how your product or how your service makes their life better or easier or solves their problem. People want to know, why should I care what you have to say? This goes back to what I talked about a few tips ago, how businesses are constantly being marketed to. So they want to know very quickly, should I listen to this person or should I not listen to this person? So you need to make sure that you quickly are able to let them know how you're able to help them. And this will be a way to create interest in your brand because they'll be able to, and they'll listen to you and have that connection because they know that you actually can make their life better. The sixth tip is to make sure that you not only make a good impression with the person that you believe to be the decision maker, but also make sure that you make a good impression and that you're friendly and kind to everyone you meet in the company. It's an easy thing to do as you go into a sales call and you think you've researched out and you think you know who the decision maker is, and you go in and maybe you spend most of your time and your conversation directed to that person. Little did you know that some of the other people in the room, or one of the other people in the room, they were also very crucial to that decision maker making a decision. They might be a big influencer. And if you get off on the wrong foot or you ignore somebody who is also an influencer, you might lose the sale because you might have sold the decision maker, but the influencer can undermine what you've said. And so make sure that you're not only making a good impression, you're being friendly and kind to the person you think is the decision maker, but make sure you include everyone that is in that room or that you meet in that company. Very, very important. The 7th tip is to never use defensive or argumentative tones to objections. So, when you're going out in sales, you're going to get objections. No matter what you're selling, you're constantly coming up with objections of why people say they shouldn't buy your product. And of course, one of the key tips of being successful at sales is to be able to overcome these objections. But you have to make sure that when you're overcoming these objections, you don't do so with an argument. You might win the argument, but that's going to lose you the sale. Because you know what? We are prideful people as human beings, and when our pride is attacked, we just put up walls, defensive walls. And so don't be defensive, don't be argumentative. Be a little more creative and show them how their objections are false, but do it in a very respectful, creative way without argument. And that's going to be huge. I've done that several times for some sales where the person was completely adamant against buying the product, but I asked some follow-up questions about why they were and what made them feel that way and some of the reasons behind it. And I got to the reason behind why they felt that way. And then I was able to say, you know what, this is actually how that is not as you think it is. And it was amazing. I've seen this happen a number of times, how you can transfer somebody to completely against to, okay, yeah, I'll buy it. It's just amazing, just by not being argumentative. So, you might approach somebody for a product and, they might be completely against it. But if you're not argumentative and you're not defensive, they don't put an emotional trigger and memory in their head. So you might approach them again a year or two later, and since they don't remember having a heated argument with you, and they didn't put a memory in their head that they were completely against that product, they might have changed their mind at that point, and they'll buy. I've had several people do that, where I approached them initially. They said, no, I don't want that at all. I'm not interested. They just weren't having it. And then a year or two down the road, I was able to sell them that exact product. And so that's happened, and I know it was successful because they did not have an argument from that initial time. You got to overcome objections, but you also have to know when to stop and when to just let it go and come back to it later. Don't be defensive and argumentative. The 8th tip I have is to avoid being pushy or salesy. So obviously, as a salesperson, you have to make sales. That's a given. But you don't have to do so in a way that makes you look pushy or salesy. How you can go around this is to, instead of being a person pushing sales on people, be a problem solver and an educator. Because if you do that, the sale will naturally close as you go through the process. It'll be a natural process to close that sale. It'll make sense as you're going along. If you've solved problems and you've educated them on the benefits of it, it'll naturally progress. The conversation will naturally progress to the sell. Do this in such a way that people are not being sold, but they are buying. People don't like to be sold, but they do love to buy. So if you can approach your sales process as an educator and as a friend and truly be there to help them, then you can sell that product a lot easier. It'll be natural. So don't be pushy, don't be salesy, but rather be a problem solver and an educator. The 9th tip is to make sure that you pay attention to their body language. So many times I've gone in and spoken with people and trying to sell them a product, and I noticed that they were very distracted. Maybe they're busy at the moment and it was really not a good time, even if it was an appointment that I made. And you can just tell that you don't have their attention. You really don't have their full attention. They are distracted for some other reason. I would really highly recommend that you, because of this body language they're giving you, ask them if they would like to reschedule the meeting. Because you know what? You don't have their full attention anyway. And so it's not really going to be an effective meeting. You're really just kind of wasting your time. But also, you know what? It allows you to gain the respect because they can tell that you truly are paying attention to them and that you actually care about their situations. And you know what? When they actually do reschedule that meeting with you, if they say that they would like to, they're going to listen to you a lot more because they respect you a little bit more now. So that's going to be very effective. What I would consider doing is if you need to reschedule with somebody, this next time, try to schedule that as like a lunch meeting so you can get them away from the distractions so you can keep that from happening maybe the second meeting. But just pay attention to body language. That's one of the ways body language could happen. There's a million other ways that their body language could tell you a bunch of things, but just pay attention. The 10th way to make sure that you are making a good connection with your companies and the people you're contacting and also generating interest in your brand, the 10th way is to make sure that you respect their preferences and time. So first of all, preferences. This has to do a lot with how you contact, how much ahead of time you give them a heads up that you're going to be by, how they prefer to receive sales information. So you want to actually ask people what their preferences are. That way you can respect their preferences and do those things. Some people might like email way more than a phone call. They might prefer that because they're busy. Other people might think that an email is just not respectful and that they would much rather have you call them. And so you got to kind of figure that out. You got to ask them how they prefer you contact them. You got to ask them about what their preferences are. How much ahead of time do you need to let them know if you need to schedule a meeting with them and things like that. You also need to make sure that you're respectful of their time. So when you do go to call them or you go to visit them or have a meeting, make sure you're organized, you're prepared, you're very concise with your sales presentation, and you can always extend it and do some small talk if they're open for it. If they kind of direct the conversation that way, you can always change that. But make sure you have the ability to really make your sales presentation concise. Make sure you're really organized. You're super prepared because everyone is busy, and your lack of preparation will waste their time, and they won't probably buy your product because you wasted their time. But somebody that is respectful, that is concise, that's prepared with a presentation, they will more likely buy from that person and respect you and build a more genuine connection with you. The 11th and final tip for you is to make sure that when you're approaching a business or a person within a business that you understand that the size of the sale and the size of the company will determine how you approach that sale. So for instance, here's a good example. Let's start with the size of the sale. Let's say that you were going to a company to get them to change the kind of copy paper that they use in their office. That's going to take a little bit of sales work to do, but you're not going to have to probably visit them 10 times and meet with their engineers and do this and that and the other and meet with 50 different teams just to switch over the copy paper. That's going to be a pretty simple process compared to what if you were trying to get a large company to switch their banking to your bank. That's going to be a lot more involved. You're going to have to go and talk to a lot of different people in the organization. You're going to have to meet with a lot of different people. You're going to have to take people through a lot longer sales process. And to just show up the first visit and try to push for a sale right then for a complicated process is actually going to be very disrespectful and make you look like a novice, and they're not going to respect that. Also, the size of a company. So if it's a really, really small company, you approach that company a lot different. Most likely they don't have people that are buyers, but they are the buyers themselves. Most likely they don't have all these advisory teams and different people that you have to get through layers-wise. And so you can just go directly to the owner and make that sale. But if it is a large company, you got to be respectful of the hierarchy they have. You don't want to go in and just act like you own the place and just be disrespectful. You want to approach that company respectfully and properly and go about the right protocol to get to a sale, because there will be people and processes that have to be done. And so understand the size of the sale, understand the size of the company, and how you approach it. And that'll be a good way to approach that. So these are my 11 tips about how to make a genuine connection with the companies and people that you're meeting and generating true interest in your brand. These are all tips that I have personally experienced, like I said, over the last about 3 years or so. And this is my line of work. This is what I do every day. I'm contacting people. I'm building relationships. I'm opening accounts. And, I've taken a territory that was virtually nothing, and I've taken it to several hundred accounts. I've been successful in this area, and so I know these tips do work. They're not just theory. These are not things that I just read in a book somewhere. These are things that I've actually experienced. So you use these tips. Make sure that your sales presentations and your approaching actually include these items. Keep these in mind. Now, in closing, I just want to say that, as always, the show notes to this podcast will be available on the Sales Purpose blog. If you just go to salespurpose.com/session011 for session 11. So salespurpose.com/session011. There you'll find links and the information that was discussed here on this podcast. I also want to let you guys know that, as I mentioned in the beginning, if you want your question to be answered here on the Sales Mastermind podcast, just simply email me at jonathans@salespurpose.com, or go over to salespurpose.com/SM podcast, and you'll see a couple other methods of asking a question to get it featured here on the podcast. Also wanted to just let you guys know that I do have a free sales course available entitled The 7 Secrets of Sales Success. And you can find out more information about that by going to salespurpose.com/academy. And then also, this is the official podcast of the Sales Mastermind community on Facebook. And I just want to invite you to join the Facebook group. If you go to salespurpose.com/community, and there we can continue the conversation that we started here on the podcast, and you'll be among a community of other sales and marketing professionals to help you get your questions answered, and also to be able to help them as a community. So I'm very thankful that you listened today. I hope these tips were helpful for you, and I look forward to talking to you guys in the next episode and hearing from you in the email. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Sales Mastermind podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes below for any resources or sites mentioned in the podcast. Also, be sure to subscribe and join the Facebook community to continue the conversation.